G'day, my name is Ben White. Josh Giumelli and I are engineers with the Kondinin Group, and we've put together a bit of a presentation for you today on drones and their role in agriculture. We hope you find it useful, and with a little luck, and hopefully if technology doesn't fail us, we'll be able to take a couple of questions from you over the phone when we've gotten through this presentation. Now, obviously, we can't be there today, but Josh and I have worked together for 20 years. We've worked on Farming Ahead magazine since 1999, and we head overseas every second year to an event called Agritechnica to try and keep up with what's happening on an agricultural technology development front. Obviously, we've got our ear to the ground on this stuff all the time, but it is an area of interest for us and something that we do try and promote pretty heavily through Farming Ahead. Now, drones are pretty big business, and you can see that there's some serious money being invested into this area of ag technology, and we've got some big names: the Monsantos, the Syngentas, the Mitsuis are punching money into drones, and we've got some pretty big players in the likes of Trimble, Precision Hawk, GoPro, Drone Deploy, and DJI, all working pretty hard on this front. Just to give you an example, DJI raised $75 million when they first started talking about launching a drone that was going to be particularly used just for the ag space. So there is an appetite there from investors, and I think that will translate to a pretty rapid development of drones for agricultural purposes. So just in terms of what that's yielding, I guess, we're starting to see developments of drones like the Phantom 4. We're seeing specifications increase in terms of battery life, range, and also speed. Range, I've noted there, is capped because according to CASA regulations, we need to maintain line of sight, and with some of these drones capable of operating up to 4 or 5 k's away, there's just no way that we can see them at that sort of distance. So I guess what we're trying to say there is it's capped by our ability to see the drone. So the Phantom 4, we're talking about a maximum speed of 72 kilometres an hour and a flight time of 30 minutes. Now, back in the day when the first Phantom drones came out, we're talking about a flight time of sort of 15 to 18 minutes. So that's substantially improved over a short period of time, and I think with the investment that we're seeing punched into drones in the drone space, we're going to see some of those specifications increase pretty rapidly as well. Just to talk about some other drones that are out there, we've got the Precision Hawk Lancaster 5. We're talking about a 1.15 kg payload. That's pretty substantial. Will carry a lot of sensors and some pretty high-end equipment. We're talking about a 45-minute run time, so ability to cover quite a large area in a short period of time is increased. With those longer run times, we don't need to land the drone and replace the battery as often. A very recent release, the EBX, which comes with a choice of different cameras. One that basically gives you a standard visual. We've got thermal options, and then we've got multispectral cameras like the Sequoia Plus. We're talking about a runtime of 90 minutes maximum, and the manufacturer claims that you're probably likely to get about 500 hectares out of that drone over that 90-minute period. So that's pretty substantial. That's quite an area of land, and also you'll note that as we're talking, the fixed wing style aircraft obviously capable of covering a larger area, purely because they're a little more efficient in the way they use their battery, and while they can't hover over one spot, they do cover a fair bit of area in a short amount of time. It does make them a little bit more difficult to take off and land, I should note. Alright, so in addition to the performance specifications improving, we're also seeing a continual improvement in sensor design. Now, a couple of new releases here. We've got the Anafi from Parrot, which has an impressive 20 megapixel sensor, visual sensor there, so a standard camera. And that's got a 2.8 times lossless digital zoom built into that camera. And more recently, we've seen on the right-hand side the Mavic drone from DJI. This is a Mavic 2 with two different camera options. On the left there you'll see the 20 megapixel 1-inch Hasselblad sensor, or alternatively they also do a zoom version which has a 24 to 48mm optical zoom camera. So a lot of work now being done on the sensors, and I suppose that brings us to our next point. From an agricultural perspective, visual or RGB or standard camera sort of sensors are fantastic because they give us an idea visually of what's going on, but there are other sensors that we can bolt onto drones that can give us a better idea of what's happening in a paddock, and that could be the likes of LiDAR, it could be near infrared, it could be red edge, or it could be thermal. And all these sensors can be used to evaluate things like pasture growth, stomatal stress, and we'll touch on how they might be applied to an agricultural practice as we move through with some examples. We'll start with the multispectral cameras, and here we're looking at a MicaSense red edge camera and also a Parrot Sequoia camera, and these are a couple of cameras on the right hand side there that are used in conjunction with drones and give us an indication of what's going on in that near or the non-visible spectrum. Red edge and near infrared. I mean, if we combine some of the various layers of light reflectance information, we can come up with biomass maps, and they can be quite useful in determining what's going on, certainly at a pasture level. And given we're talking here about not so much crops, although I appreciate that quite a few members of the audience will be croppers as well as sheep producers, I think you'll find this technology quite interesting. Okay, so here we have what we can expect out of NDVI and NIR images. Basically, NDVI uses near infrared and the RGB visible spectrum to create an NDVI image, which then correlates very closely with both yield and a cropping sense, and can be also used to give us an idea of what's going on from a plant biomass perspective, which is obviously useful for pasture health and vigour measurements, and give us an idea of what's going on the ground from that perspective. One of the more recent sensor applications is the thermal sensor, radiometric thermal. This can give us an idea of what's going on at a plant level, and it's being used by some plant breeders to get an idea of how easily plants are stressed, whether they have some potential drought tolerance. It can also help us spot animals as well with that heat signature in a paddock, potentially at night. And you've all seen where the likes of rescue cameras have picked up people in the bush that have been lost, and that thermal or radiometric thermal sensor technology is being combined with drones for quite a number of applications. Not terribly cheap at this stage, but I think probably with time and as most things technologically do, we'll see a drop in cost. Okay, so just going to play a little video now looking at applications outside Broadacre, and when you're looking at this, think not so much a Broadacre cropping scenario, but potentially one option to get to some remote weeds down in a gully somewhere perhaps that's difficult to get to with other spraying equipment, or potentially spraying at a sort of more horticultural level. So spraying is one of those things that we'll touch on a little bit later on, but I just thought I'd play this little video. Now my Chinese is not so good, but as you can see, we've got some subtitles there, which basically talk about the way the spray is being used on a pretty small level. We're talking about 65 to 80 acres a day, which is not a huge area, obviously limited then by the battery capacity of the drone, and also the requirement to refill the spray tank. So looking at some other applications for drones from a non-cropping perspective, so in terms of livestock production, we've got things like checking pig or dog traps and baits, and we actually had a farmer call up a year or so ago suggesting that he was doing that and he'd found them quite useful. And then of course we've got the checking of water points, and again limited a little bit by the CASA regulation for line of sight maintenance there, but potentially that could change in the future. All right, from a livestock perspective specifically, one little case study we saw from Victorian producers Jason and Penny Tromp potentially might lead to maternity scoring for ewes, where we're monitoring ewe and lamb behaviour. Now, it's a pretty interesting concept, and obviously the sheep need to get used to having the drone buzzing overhead, but being able to monitor what's going on could give us a better understanding of just that maternity scoring, and potentially how good some ewes are compared to others if we're trying to differentiate between a particular bloodline. Now, one of the applications I think that is of most interest to livestock producers is the potential for rapid pasture monitoring using drones. So getting an idea of what biomass is out there, estimating feed on offer, and then also therefore budgeting feed and or making stocking rate decisions based on that information. So this image is actually from the New South Wales DPI, the Orange Ag Institute. They're using LoRa connectivity to connect drone and pasture-based sensors which are out in the paddock, connects them up to the internet, and gives the potentially the producer live information as to what's going on in the paddock. And I think that's pretty exciting, and I think it's probably, as I say, one of the first applications we're going to see from a livestock perspective of the use of drones in our business. From a research perspective, we have used drones just for little things like layouts and infrastructure layout. Potentially, this is something that might be of interest to livestock producers. Looking at either yard designs or animal flow rates through yards, just to get an idea of where there are say sticking points in the yards and where things could be optimised. And I used this grain storage facility example because that's some work that we've done most recently, just looking at the planned layout of various grain storage facilities and giving growers an idea of what they could do if they're going to invest in that sort of infrastructure. And I think the same could be applied from, say, the grain storage perspective through to a livestock handling perspective. Now, there are a few myths getting floated about, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of those, a few unlikely applications, and unless something sort of significant changes. The first one I'll touch on is drone mustering. There's been a bit of hype around this, and I'll just, he's got a good Queensland voice, this chap from Rockhampton. What he's actually doing is just explaining, that he's effectively training the cattle here to be mustered by drone. Now, great idea, good concept. I think one of the challenges is going to be the CASA line of sight requirements and obviously battery life of the drone. To be honest, a good dog is probably going to be cheaper, and they don't get taken out of the air by an eagle. Look, a few considerations there. I'm not saying that it won't be used at any stage in the future. If there are some relaxation or negotiation on those CASA regulations, then that might well see some of this change, as well as the remote watering point checks that people have been sort of talking about, drones being used for. So if that line of sight requirement is dropped, some additional applications might sort of come to the fore. Right, the other one is spraying. Now, we talked about spraying before as potentially getting to some hard to access to weeds in remote areas. The biggest challenge really here is spray capacity in the tank. We're talking about sort of 10 kgs of product, of solid product, or 10 litres of liquid, which is not going to last a long time if we're doing more of a broadacre sort of spray. Both the product is going to have to be topped up regularly, and also the battery life is going to be chewed out pretty quickly, I'd suggest. We've also got that CASA line of sight requirement, again, being a bit of a sticking point from this perspective. But look, as I say, remote access might be one area where it's applicable, and in a pasture sense, that's probably on the fringes, I'd suggest. Right, now there are new applications for drones always being developed, and I wanted to bring you a couple of novelty ones just to finish off for a bit of a laugh. So we'll kick this off. This is in China, and you can see they're burning plastic off power lines. Obviously, Josh and I get pretty excited about anything that both flies and shoots flames. So yeah, that's one we thought we'd show you because it's pretty exciting stuff. I'm not sure whether they're going to be commercially available terribly soon. Okay, this final one is probably a bit silly, but I thought we'd bring it to you anyway. As you can see, a Danish artist liked his cat so much that once the poor fellow died, he had him stuffed and turned into a drone, so he became a flying cat. Maybe something to think about if you've got a favourite working dog and you want to go down that drone mustering line of thought. Other than that, probably not likely to be seen here anytime soon. Alright, bear with us. I think we're going to try and get myself on the phone, and if you've got any questions, hopefully we'll endeavour to answer those, and if we don't know the answer, obviously we'll just make something up.